This is Fred Richani of the Sports Courier. I'm joined by a very special guest. He is a TNA Impact Wrestling legend, the original king of the Indies before it was cool to be the king of the Indies. He's the man that has the rear that makes all the girls cheer, or so he told me off the air. He is the master of making the Appletini one half of arguably the best tag team in wrestling today. Bad Influence, the Fallen Angel, Christopher Daniels. Mr. Daniels, how are you doing today, sir?
Greetings and salutations, Frederick. How are you today?
I am doing quite well, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I just want to say, if you are arguing about whether or not Bad Influence is the best tag team in the business today, you're losing that argument. Trust me.
Okay. Point taken, sir. Point taken. Now
Point given.
Now you just had a big win over Joseph Park. As a guy that's been so successful throughout his career, does it ever get old to win, even when you beat a guy like Joseph Park who's a rookie?
Well, first of all, when you say big win over Joseph Park, I assume you mean per ounce. Yes, it was the largest win of my career. The only way it would have been bigger is if I had ever wrestled Yokozuna and beaten him. No, I never get tired of winning. Winning is awesome. Winning fuels me. Winning is the whole point of this whole deal. And so I have no problem winning continuously and often.
Now, we have Turning Point next week. As of right now, yourself and Kazarian are not scheduled for a match. But could we expect to see Bad Influence make their presence felt next week?
Of course. I mean, let's be honest. Bad Influence is the most entertaining part of Impact Wrestling today, and a television show that doesn't have Bad Influence on it is just ready to be changed the channel upon. So I'm definitely interested to see what happens in the matches with Magnus and Samoa Joe, the matches with Bobby Roode and James Storm, especially Bobby Roode, my ego partner. But I'm also interested to see what happens with Joseph Pancake versus Abyss. I'd love to see a train run through the middle of that ring at the exact moment where those two behemoths lock up for the very first time.
Now, you've been a guy that's always been quite charismatic, very good on the mic, but I feel like this last couple of years with Kazarian, you guys have really, really hit your stride, particularly Kazarian, who finally broke out of his shell. What do you think clicked for you guys when you first started teaming up?
Well, first of all, I think it was an opportunity that they finally gave us. I mean, for whatever reason, I've always been this charismatic, and I'm sure Frankie feels the same way, but we've never really been given the opportunity to go out there and be ourselves. Frankie and I, maybe 2 years ago, we saw the writing on the wall in terms of tag teams in TNA. Beer Money had just split up. The Motor City Machine Guns were battling injury, and we sort of saw that there wasn't really any plans in the pipeline for either one of us as a singles. So we decided to try to pool our efforts and try to be something, try to be the next Beer Money, the next Motor City Machine Guns for TNA. And they gave us that opportunity a year and a half ago. And ever since then, we've been running roughshod over not just Impact Wrestling, but tag team wrestling. And as far as breaking out of our shells, it's really just a matter of going out there and being ourselves, getting an opportunity to get on a live microphone or the backstage vignettes, as it were, and just turning ourselves up to 11, 11 and a half, sometimes 12. It just depends on the speakers that we're playing with. And
how much creative input do you guys have in the stuff you do, particularly Throwback Thursday, when you guys came out as the Road Warriors?
Throwback Thursday is 1,000% our idea. Actually, 95% of the Throwback Thursdays we've done have been Frankie's idea. The only one that was a co-effort was really the Legion of Boom. Throwback Thursday literally came around just because one of us said to the other, do we have the balls to wear Zubaz in the ring and wrestle in them? And the answer, of course, is yes. And then every other Throwback Thursday we've had has been, do we have the balls to dress as fill in the blank? And so that literally has been our ideas. As far as like our creative control or what we do, TNA and the creative guys there have been very cool about giving us blueprints of what they want to see, but letting us sort of fill in the blanks as far as like what would make whatever they want from us a Bad Influence vignette versus just any other guy that you throw in the mix. They sort of let us find our own voice on the microphone, and they've been very cool and very supportive, and it's been awesome to have that collaboration with the creative team like we've had in the last 2 years.
Yeah, you guys have been so entertaining, but I asked a couple of your buddies, or maybe not buddies, AJ Styles and Garrett Bischoff a few weeks back. I said, who are the most entertaining guys in TNA, backstage, in the ring, whatever? They both said Eric Young. Given your beef with Eric Young and Joseph Park, do you take offense to that?
I don't. I will agree that Eric Young is very entertaining. He's very funny guy. And whatever problems I have with him in a wrestling ring notwithstanding, I can't deny that in the past 2 years, especially with his television show, that he's sort of branched out and become a force to be reckoned with. And he's always been a funny guy. But if you ask Eric Young, you pull Eric Young aside and you ask him who's as entertaining as him behind the scenes, he'll definitely tell you bad influence.
And I also talked to the BroMans and my buddy Robbie E. I like to think we're buddies, but he still says I'm not on the list. He said the BroMans are the best dancers in TNA. That I find a little preposterous when I see you doing your thing to the Bad Influence theme song.
He just means exotic dancing, and I'm not one to venture into that foray. I'm not in for that sort of stuff. But if that floats his skirt, then God bless him. Good for him. Good for both of them.
And you were part of WCW's last days, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, you can't really. I was sitting at home collecting a paycheck for the last 3 months of the company, but that had nothing to do with me. It was their decision. Actually, both times I was under contract with WCW, they didn't use me very often. They never really had a spot creatively for me, and I just sort of fell through the cracks. So there that is.
How'd you mentally bounce back and continue to progress your career? Because for the longest time, I remember as a kid reading in Pro Wrestling Illustrated, there were two independent stars that people always talked about, especially two that never really got a shot at the big time. It was Tom Reckless Youth Carter and the Fallen Angel Christopher Daniels. What made you keep going after the demise of WCW and ECW?
I just figured there was going to be something that came along. I mean, part of it was that I didn't really have anything that I wanted to fall back on, and I was still successful, and I was staying busy. I was still earning my living being a professional wrestler. As crazy as that sounds, in the mid 90s, but let's say 98, 99, when I became sort of a full-time professional wrestler versus wrestling on the weekends and having a full-time job, I was doing well with my independent schedule in the United States and going overseas to Japan. I was earning a very good living, and so when WCW closed, when ECW closed, even though I never really had any sort of relationship with them that lasted very long, just because those two places closed, there were still plenty of opportunities for me as a professional wrestler to earn a living. It may not have been a living that was on a very well-lit stage, but I was still earning my money, and that really was the bottom line for me getting into professional wrestling. I always said my goal was to make a living doing what I wanted to do, and since the middle of 1999, that's what I've been fortunate enough to do.
Certainly a great career. You're also one of the pioneers of Ring of Honor, but prior to Ring of Honor, there was the King of the Indies tournament and All Pro Wrestling run by Roland Alexander. Unfortunately, Mr. Alexander recently passed away. For any younger fans that may not be familiar with him and his influence on professional wrestling, can you talk a little bit about the positive impact he had on you and others in the SoCal scene?
I can, man. I think Roland Alexander was very passionate about professional wrestling. He was he was a student of the game. He loved watching all forms of professional wrestling, whether it was the stuff in the States, the stuff in Japan, the stuff in Mexico. He grew up in watching the Southern California scene, the Roy Shire era. And so, I mean, that affected his outlook as a promoter. And, he always was someone who had the history of professional wrestling in mind, and he wanted to add to it rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. He was always looking to sort of pay homage to the stuff of the past, and he had a very old school mentality when it came to professional wrestling. And I think it showed not just in the way he promoted his shows, but in the way that he trained and helped train the guys that came out of APW, guys like Mike Modest, guys like Donovan Morgan, Robert Thompson, Boyce LeGrand, Vinny Massaro, all of those guys that I had the opportunity to work with in APW, whether they were trained specifically by Roland or just under the tutelage, the guys that were under the tutelage of Roland, because Roland was never really one to physically get in the ring and wrestle, but he had the mentality to sort of guide these guys in a proper direction. And so, all pro wrestling for a long time, there wasn't a lot of professional wrestling really making headlines on the independent scene on the West Coast. And APW was one of the few that sort of rose above the, I guess, the obscurity of the West Coast wrestling scene at that point, and definitely made a name for itself.
You think that scene could make a comeback?
Of course. I think, there are places like Pro Wrestling Guerrilla in Southern California that are consistently, putting out great wrestling. It's definitely a destination for guys in the independent scene. If they know that if they want to make a name and make waves in professional wrestling, independent professional wrestling, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla is definitely a destination for guys like that. And I mean, you look at the roster of PWG and the guys that come in every month when they're running their shows. It's a who's who of who's a big name on the independent scene now. As far as All Pro Wrestling, I think that definitely depends on the people, the family of Roland Alexander, the guys that are still sort of in charge of All Pro Wrestling, whether they can continue past Roland's passing or not. But there's a lot of talent and there's a lot of places to go out here in Southern California and California as a whole. And it's just a matter of guys just, continuing to put their nose to the grindstone and try and put out good wrestling that gets that buzz, that word of mouth, and gets eyes on the product.
Is there anybody that you particularly have your eye on that you think is ready to eventually get a shot with TNA or WWE?
I do. It's sort of unfair because I don't get an opportunity to wrestle or watch the independent scene. The closest that would be to an independent scene would be like keeping an eye on guys through Ring of Honor and PWG, and even that's not really fair to call them independent, especially Ring of Honor with their television deal and the fact that they're promoting, throughout the United States at this point. But I mean, you hear about guys like Adam Cole, who's the current Ring of Honor champion and PWG champion, guys like Tommaso Ciampa and the Young Bucks and, Roderick Strong, Davey Richards, Eddie Edwards, Jay Lethal, who's still doing great in Ring of Honor after the couple of years he's been there. Like anybody that's made a name for themselves or is currently competing in Ring of Honor and PWG, these guys are wrestling the top wrestlers in independent wrestling, and it's just a matter of time before, whether Ring of Honor grows. I mean, they're continuing to grow and add stations under the Sinclair banner. I think it's just a matter of time before they get a more national exposure and a spotlight put on their product.
You've been one of the best wrestlers in the world for a long time. I think if there's one thing TNA doesn't get enough credit for, it's putting, I don't want to say smaller guys, but smaller guys that people are used to seeing at the top of the card. It didn't matter whether they were big or small. If they could work, they'd be at the top of the card. Ring of Honor been doing the same thing. How proud are you to see the evolution of pro wrestling where guys like yourself, where guys like AJ Styles, CM Punk, Daniel Bryan are main eventing Raws, SmackDowns, Impacts, and pay-per-views?
Well, I've just been fortunate enough to, continue working hard at this and getting better, working the better guys. And yeah, like you said, professional wrestling has sort of gotten past the idea that bigger is better. I mean, yes, you've got guys like John Cena, who's, 250, 240, whatever. But there's also guys like Austin Aries, who, a smaller guy and definitely somebody that 20 years ago may not have been in the position he's in now, but his work ethic, his in-ring work, took what some people envision as a negative in terms of his size and made people forget it. And I think that, professional wrestling has sort of evolved to the point where people don't care about the size of the guy specifically. They care more about what he brings to the ring, whether it's his in-ring work or his charisma or his, whatever gets people's attention. That's what people care about these days. And I mean, it's sort of, in any sort of fighting sport, boxing, MMA, a lot of times the smaller guys are the most exciting guys. You look at George St. Pierre, who's not, I've got 30 pounds at least on George St. Pierre, and yet he's probably the number one fighter in the world. And, his fights bring eyes to the product whenever he walks into the octagon. You look at Floyd Mayweather. I mean, he's, one of the smaller guys in boxing, but he's probably the top boxer in in boxing today. So I mean, it's not a matter of, being 6'5" and 280 pounds. Those days are sort of past. It's more a level playing field in terms of physical size.
And do you think MMA has kind of helped that perception at all because of the fact that there are smaller guys like GSP, like Anderson Silva? I mean, Anderson Silva's kind of a big guy, but you know what I mean? He's not like a jacked heavyweight like Brock Lesnar. Do you think that the UFC, Bellator have helped the perception of pro wrestling and maybe convinced pro wrestling promoters to say, you know what, we can push guys aren't 6'5", 250 pounds?
I think they just sort of reestablished that because I think it was happening in professional wrestling before mixed martial arts really became a force or as popular as it has been. I mean, you go back to the days of Shawn Michaels and Sean Waltman. They were reaching their success long before MMA was really the worldwide phenomenon that it is. So I think it's just sort of reestablished something that professional wrestling had already established, that it doesn't matter about the size of the guy if he's talented, whether he's 5'8" and 180 pounds or 6'9" and 300 pounds. If he's entertaining, if he's talented, pay attention to him.
All right, I'm not calling you old here, Mr. Daniels, but
that's fair.
But you do not look like a guy that's in your early 40s, and you certainly don't move like a guy that's been wrestling for 2 decades. What the hell is your secret?
I sold my soul to the devil when I was younger, and so I remained at this same for the last 20 years. Honestly, I wish I could tell you that there was a secret other than just hard work and wrestling smart. I mean, I've never found myself to be the highest risk taker when I'm in the professional wrestling ring. I've always been of the mindset that I would never do something that I couldn't do every night of the week. If I had to. And so, I've sort of dabbled in high flying, and I've tried to be a very well-rounded wrestler, but I've never been one to go out and, defy death on a nightly basis. And so I've been very lucky in terms of injury. I've been very fortunate to avoid major injury over the course of my life. And in the last couple of years, I've been very cognizant of trying to minimize the amount of damage that happens to me. And so I've been taking better care of myself in terms of, my workouts. I've gotten into things like yoga, DP yoga, full body workouts, high intensity interval training, that sort of stuff that sort of keeps your stamina up. It doesn't necessarily build a Brock Lesnar body, but I've taken the tools that I've been given and sort of refined them to the point where I feel like I'm in the best shape of my life. And if I was asked to do a 6-night-a-week schedule, I feel like I could do it because I keep myself in good shape. I minimize the amount of damage that I take in every match, and I'm in it for the long term. And so it's been 20 years at this point, and I don't see an end in sight where I'm sitting.
I'm sure fans will be happy to hear that. I
hope so.
You've also been doing very well for yourself on the media front. You're all over the place, dude. Every time I get like a press release talking about Christopher Daniels, Austin Aries, your publicist, Mark, is a hustler, dude. Why haven't more wrestlers and MMA fighters who are independent contractors followed your lead and get publicist?
I think it's just it's hard to put your public relations. It's not something you can see. It's not something you can touch, and so it's hard. It's a hard concept, I think, for some guys to understand that your image, especially as a professional wrestler, because you are your product, it's hard for them to sort of rationalize, putting that much effort into their media presence. And I've been very fortunate that Mark Crussell, my publicist, has been, very loyal and very tenacious in his getting my name out there. And I think that his work speaks for itself as far as the amount of press that I've done for TNA and for myself in the last couple of years with his help. Like you said, I've been down everybody's throat pretty much.
All right. Do you have some time for a few fan questions real quick?
Please.
Excellent. Okay. First one here from Eugene. Were you mad that Taz called you out for drinking non-alcoholic, Appletini?
When did he do that? I had no idea. So A, no. The answer was no. I was not upset because I didn't know about it. And B, he knows better than that. My Appletini is delightful. It has just enough alcohol to be an Appletini without being green water.
Fair enough. Terry Allen Jr. asks, when did you realize you had the best moonsault ever?
From the very beginning, Terry. I think anybody who does it as good as me should call it the best moonsault ever. Unfortunately, no one does it as good as I do. And I've been doing it so well for so long now that it's just firmly entrenched. And by the way, I'm a big fan of your dad.
Yeah, I don't know if he's related to Magnum TA, but that's a good point.
Let's just say he is.
Okay, let's just pretend he is. Hopefully he's got an awesome.
Sure.
Hopefully he's got an awesome mustache too.
Of course he does.
All right, you've dabbled in acting. Could we expect to see you in any movies?
I hope so. I mean, as someone with an acting background and living in Southern California, I always audition as often as I can. But acting, like any other worthwhile endeavor, it takes 100% of your time. And so while I'm, happy to go and audition for things, the truth of the matter is I'm still 100% committed to my professional wrestling career. And should that change in the future, there's no reason why I wouldn't be able to, parlay my hard work and effort in pro wrestling into an acting career. It's just a matter of, pounding the pavement and auditioning as often as I can and trying to get better in every audition and every project that I am fortunate enough to land. Just trying to better myself in every way, every chance I get.
David Santiago asks, where can I get the cool Fallen Angel style gloves?
Those are handmade. So, I mean, you can go out and buy your own glove and edit it accordingly. But, yeah, they don't make those for some reason. Probably for, I guess, the parent-teacher council or whatever they're called probably would frown upon the selling of the GFY glove.
Okay, this one... I'll ask this anyway because we are about the fans here. Teresa asks, you have a nice derriere. Do you squat?
She's right.
Do you squat?
Of course.
Is there any advice? Is there any advice you could give to men that want to have the rear that all the girls cheer?
Well, you can't because it's mine and I own it. So, but to try and get a comparable rear end, definitely squats, lunges. A lot of it's genetics, guys. You're just stuck. I apologize. I mean, I don't apologize. I can't help you. There's no help.
Classic Dutton Eyes asks, is there any tag team outside of TNA you guys would like to test yourselves against?
I'd love to see the Young Bucks return to TNA. I think right now they're on probably the tear of any tag team in the world right now. They're IWGP Junior Tag Champions. They're Dragon Gate USA Tag Champions. They're PWG Tag Champions. And they're definitely living their dream right now on the independent scene. But I would love for them to come back to TNA and get that national exposure that TNA offers, and to get in the ring to have a Bad Influence versus Young Bucks feud, I think would be great television and it would be great wrestling.
Okay, Connor Field asks, your boy Bobby Roode is currently in the world title tournament. Could we see Christopher Daniels back in the world title picture?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like despite the fact that Frankie and I are the best tag team in the business, we still have our singles goals. We just know that we don't have to give up our tag team to become singles champions. It's just a matter of an opportunity. And right now, with all the focus being put on this world title tournament, guys like Bobby Roode, James Storm, Kurt Angle still in the mix, Jeff Hardy still in the mix. These guys are fighting for the opportunity to become the new TNA World Champion. And after that happens, whoever ends up winning the tournament, they're going to find a list of guys that are ready to become World Champion if the opportunity arises. And two of those handsome men are Frankie Kazarian and this guy.
Ben Osner asks, he's assuming you probably get this question all the time, but I'll ask it for him anyway. What do you feel like is your greatest match?
It's hard to say greatest match. I could tell you that one of the best ones, or at least the one as soon as it was over that I felt like, did the best job as far as like what we had in mind and what we wanted to put across to the fans and the most well received was probably the three-way match with AJ and Samoa Joe at Unbreakable. I think that, even, 8 years later, that the people still talk about it as one of the best in the company's history, and I think it stands the test of time. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the timing of it, the fact that the fans at that time wanted to see three guys sort of step up and show the world that they were ready to be main event players, and I think we did that.
Definitely a classic match. Personally, one of my all-time favorites. J. George Estrella asks, do you know the identity of friends of AJ Styles who play those video packages in Impact Wrestling? And if you don't, do you think that one of them could be Claire Lynch?
I don't know many friends of AJ Styles. Frankie and I used to be friends of AJ Styles, but we weren't invited to join this particular group. But I hear that there is a newsletter and jackets, but I don't have one. And I don't think Claire Lynch is a friend of anybody involved with TNA.
Fair point, fair point. All right, I think this is a good one to get you out here on. What's one piece of advice you could give to anybody that's an aspiring pro wrestler?
Well, first of all, I'll give you a couple pieces of advice. First of all, stay in school. Be prepared in case a career in professional wrestling doesn't work out, because so few guys that go into professional wrestling can make a living from it. If you decide to go into professional wrestling, find a school that's reputable. Find a guy that has been successful in professional wrestling and have that person train you. Because if you were a C+ student, the odds are good that you'll probably be a C+ teacher. And if you are a C+ teacher, you're probably never going to get any students better than C+ that you teach. So have that in mind when you're looking for a school. Three of the best schools that I can tell you off the top of my head: Lance Storm's Academy in Canada, the 3D school down in Florida, and the Ring of Honor school. Those are three off the top of my head that are great schools, and have guys that have been to the dance and know what it takes to sort of break through and make waves. Once you've decided to get into school and go through the training, once you're ready to wrestle matches, you need to wrestle as many different people as you can, for as many different promoters as you can, and in as many different places as you can, because it's not until you become comfortable with yourself as a professional wrestler that you become a commodity to a promoter. If you're always wrestling the same guys, if you're sort of wrestling in your backyard, as it were, and I don't mean that literally, but I mean if you're wrestling in the place you're trained and you're wrestling the same the time, at some point you're only going to be as good as the best guy in your group. And so you need to branch out and wrestle complete strangers. I just actually did an independent show in North Carolina this past month, and I told them, once you get to the point where you can walk into a locker room and meet a professional wrestler for the very first time, and hours later go out and have an entertaining match, that's when you become a commodity to a promoter, where they know that no matter who they put you in the ring with, or who, what style of match that they want you to have, they know that you can go out there and entertain and be worth paying money to see. And that is something that I sort of pride myself on, in the sense that I could go and wrestle anybody and put a good match together with anybody, and promoters knew that they would get their money's worth if they booked me. And so that was sort of how I got to do as many independent shows as I did when I was coming up, before TNA came around, before Ring of Honor came around. That was sort of how I was making my living, being that guy especially on the East Coast, where promoters knew that if they brought me in, they'd get a good match out of me.
Wise words from one of the best. Christopher Daniels, thank you so much. Before we go, where can fans find you online, sir?
I don't have Facebook. I'm not online often enough to do Facebook very well, but I am on Twitter at FAC Daniels. The FAC stands for Fallen Angel Christopher. You'd be surprised how many people don't know that. You can see me online at impactwrestling.com every week, especially with the Impact 365 website. I'm always entering wacky videos of the stuff that Bad Influence does behind the scenes. You can get any merchandise of ours either at shoptna.com or at prowrestlingtees.com. Other than that, stop following me around, folks. Sheesh.
And we can't get any dance lessons from you? I'm sure people would want to learn how to dance like Bad Influence.
I don't do that stuff for free, doctor.
All right, I will certainly keep that in mind. Christopher Daniels, thank you so much, man.
Thanks for having me.